welcome to another episode. So this is actually a bit of a bonus episode because, as you know, season 2, I'm talking about just the tips, right? Well, something happened to me recently. So I decided to make this a bonus episode because I think the subject is important. And I don't know if it's a subject that we all talk about enough. Specifically to young females. Granted, this could happen to a male as well, but I think, unfortunately, women are more susceptible to this. And, okay, let me just go ahead and get started. So, as you know, I mentioned in the last episode that I was spending some time with number 61, and there were so many things about him that I liked. We had a little bit of problem with communication. It felt like every time we would text, we would misunderstand each other. Like the tone was off. You know, part of it was like, I think you're getting to know each other. But I also feel like things should be easy, right? And things were never easy with him with communication early on. But he did so many things that I loved. Like he was like a detail guy for one, right? He was a planner. So every time we would hang out, it was this extravagant, detailed, fun time, right? I had so much fun with him. I'm not going to say that I didn't, but I had a lot of fun with him. He was incredibly kind to Ike, which is huge to me, right? Ike, my dog, is like a huge part of my life. We spent 3 weekends together, 3 long weekends. We talked almost every day, not every day because of his job, but we talked often. And the first weekend, I think I mentioned before, we went camping. It was awesome. I don't know if you necessarily should go out with somebody out of town for a first date, but, you know, I was lucky. I was safe, right? Physically safe. And we had a lot of fun. We hung out for another weekend at his place. Like I drove up to his place with my dog, with Ike. Beautiful weekend. We had like a huge bonfire, too many drinks, so much fun. I mean, we watched a couple movies. Like, I don't know, it was just fun hanging out, right? He has a dog that I love. It was great. It was a great weekend. It was a great house. Like, it was perfect. We went out, for a couple times. It was a good weekend. Everything went really well. And like I said, everything that he does is like a grand gesture, right? So whenever something would happen where I would feel annoyed by something, it took me a while to realize that he was kind of manipulating me, right? So he was really good at the great grand gestures, right? And I think for the right person, he'll probably be a good guy. But for me and my past and my history and what I still struggle with as someone who's almost 50, it was not a good fit. And I went ahead and re-enlisted, which I'll talk about in the next episode. And he went out of town with me for that one. One of my good friends let me stay with her. Another great friend of mine flew in from another state, to help me with that process. Anyway, so number 61 was there. And he had all these grand gestures. And I'll talk about that more in the next episode. Because it did... there were some good things that happened, right? There are some good memories that happened. But overall, I think the best way for me to start is just to start at my beginning, right? Okay, so I have to warn you, this episode's not going to be me laughing very often, and I apologize, but I do think it's important to get this out there. So, I'm a 70s kid, right? And, I was born in 1971. I have one sister who's older, my mother who's like amazing, my favorite person on the planet, and my actual father, right? So I grew up in Texas in the 70s, right? So when I was a little kid, it was not rare for me to wake up in the middle of the night to hear my mother screaming and crying, right? And I just assumed that everybody lived that way, right? Because you're like a little kid, you don't know any better. Like your reality is like your reality, right? So for whatever reason, my sister didn't experience this, and I'm very grateful for that because my sister's awesome, and I'm really glad that she did not experience this. But for whatever reason, she didn't, right? She was older than me, so a big chunk of this, she was just away with friends, like sleeping over in high school, eventually went to college, things like that, right? She's older than me. Well, my first memory is my mother screaming in the middle of the night, and I hate to say that, but it's true. So my dad was over 6 feet, my mom's like 5'4", my mother's fucking amazing, love my mother. Anyway, I could go on and on because she's awesome, but I don't know, I just grew up always hearing screaming and crying. So my first memories of living in my home. And there were a few times, where I would, as a little kid, stumble out in my pajamas. Remember the pajamas of the footy? So fucking cute, right? Anyway, so I would stumble out and so comfy. And I would try to be helpful. And of course I was a little kid. And my father was over 6 feet. So he would just like push me, slap me out of the way. Because of course, as a little kid, and like natural instinct, I think, is to protect your family, right? So I love my mother, even as like an infant, of course, right? So I wanted to protect her. And I was a little kid. And of course I was like, it was futile, right? So this happened repeatedly throughout my young years. And one particular day, I woke up, she was screaming, and I was 8 years old. And I'll never forget this because it's very vivid in my mind. And I don't know why this happened on this particular day. But I woke up, my mom was screaming. I went to across the hall to my sister's room. She wasn't there. And she had one of those like princess phones. Remember those really like old style gold ivory phones? Anyway, she had one of those. And for some reason, I, walked into the hall, my mother was screaming, and I picked up the phone and I called the police. So of course, remember, this is the 70s. So domestic violence laws were completely different then. And the police showed up, and I had like bruises on my neck because he had tried strangling me, hitting me. Obviously, it wasn't just my mom, it was myself as well. And I remember being 8 years old, and the police showed up, and they were kind of like, why is this little annoying kid called? Like, what's happening, And I remember saying, look at my neck, look at my chest, it's like an 8-year-old kid. And they basically ignored me, right? Because like I said, domestic laws were different. My mother was crying and upset. I think her initial reaction was anger and embarrassment because I had called the police, right? My father, of course, was furious and looked at me like he was about to beat the shit out of me, like the second he could, right? And the police took his side, right? Like I said, the violence was different. Domestic violence laws were different. So my mother was upset and crying, and, I felt bad for her because I feel like I put her in an impossible situation. So she approached me and was just like, we need to get some clothes together. We need to leave. Like the police are making us leave. So I remember going through like the hamper. I don't know why I remember this, but I do. I remember going through the hamper looking for like one of my favorite t-shirts, right? Because I wanted to take it with me. I didn't know if I'd ever come back. Well, I ended up never seeing my father ever again, right? So I'm going to be 50. So we're talking what? How many years, right? Because we all know I'm shitty with math. I have not seen the man since. He had a different experience with my sister. So my sister still keeps in touch with him, but I refuse to. Like, I feel like at a certain point in your life, no apology would be valid for me from him. And I don't think he's in a position where he feels like anything is his fault or he feels like he has to apologize. So I've never seen a reason to connect, right? So the reason I bring this up is because I feel like, unfortunately, whether you suffer domestic violence, whether it's like your parents or your family members or your spouse, I feel like there's some patterns, and I think it's worth it to talk to you about. Painful for me. Like, I actually didn't put out this podcast last week. Didn't even want to record it because it's a little painful. But I do think that, like, as we're talking about certain things, like, there are signs, right? There's signs that you can see, right? And there's some signs that I think we don't recognize and we don't want to see. And you know me. Like, I've talked about red flags before, and a lot of times I think it's worth it to talk to your friends and family, because your friends and family see red flags in the guy you're dating that you don't see, right? Because they're looking at the guy with a different lens. Well, I think the same thing happened in my case with this abuse. And I know that sounds like such a harsh word, but I really feel like that's what it is, right? So number 61, going back to him, I just wanted to explain my past because I've been very lucky throughout my life. Like, once this situation was resolved with my father, I never saw him again that day. I didn't really suffer any kind of abuse physically at all in my lifetime. So aside from that, I would consider myself lucky, right? What didn't occur to me, though, until recently was that number 61 was actually emotionally abusive, right? Mental abuse is a real fucking thing, right? And I think that if we don't talk about what's happening in our lives truthfully and honestly, I don't think you're in a position to make your life better or to help your friends and family. So that's the whole purpose of this episode for me, is there are some patterns that are out there, and I think it's important to mention and discuss and talk about, specifically if you have children, right? So in this particular case, what happened was number 61, that third weekend, I guess the first 2 weekends were fucking amazing, the second one specifically. But the third one, once we went out of town together and once my two great friends were introduced into our mix of two, right, we became four, his true nature, his true personality came out. I don't know how else to explain it, but he had acted completely differently the first 2 weekends. Otherwise, I wouldn't have invited him, right? Especially to a weekend to me that was important because I was hanging out with 2 good friends of mine, right? So I apologized to them one-on-one and together. And once again, if they are listening to this, I do apologize because if I had known what was going to happen, right, I wouldn't have invited him. So, ultimately what happened was he drank a lot, which is interesting because over the 2 weekends and that we spent together and over the course of 4 weeks that we had spent together, where we knew each other, I should say, he often criticized my drinking. He was always like, you drink too much, you drink too often, and mentioned it several times. And I was always like, I don't drink that often. I don't drink as often as you think I drink, right? I was like, I'll come home most days because of the stress with my job. I'll have a drink or two, but I never drink to excess, right? I don't drink to black out. For me, it's just relaxing and I enjoy good quality alcohol. So it's not like I'm going to like the grocery store with like my last $3 buying the cheapest whatever I could find. I was like, I actually just trying to enjoy my evening. I don't drink every day, but I don't know. Every time I would say I'm going to have a drink or whatever, it was very like, he was very judgmental and he made me feel bad about it. Like he made me feel like I had a problem. Whether I do or don't, now it's not his fucking place, right? There was like little things like, I love my dog, right? Love Ike, I don't have children, right? So I spend a lot of time and energy on him, making sure he's happy. He goes to daycare 3 days a week. So he used to comment that I spent too much money on my dog. He was like, you don't need to buy like the high end food. It's just Victor. It's not that expensive. He was like, you don't need to do all that. He was like, your dog's fine at home, put him in a crate, whatever. Well, for one, my dog's never been in a crate. And for two, he doesn't destroy anything. I have a fucking awesome dog. And for three, what I feed my dog is really none of your business. But it was things like that, like over time. It was like little jabs, right? And then he would make me feel guilty. And then he would make me feel like if I was angry, then I was like overreacting and I was the problem. So this was all happening, but I didn't see it because I was really happy with all the sweet, gentle, grand gestures that he was making, right? So I didn't see it. What's crazy is I mentioned a couple times on Facebook, just trying to make like a joke of it. I was like, okay, guys, so number 61's awesome, but we can't talk. So over text, because every time we talk over text, we end up in a fight, right? So I made it a joke. I was like, so when we don't speak, things are good, right? And a really good friend of mine on Facebook was just kind of like, I think you have a problem with communication with this guy. I don't have a good feeling. And I actually blocked him at one point within this 4-week time period because he made me really angry. And then I unblocked him and then we picked up kind of where we left off. And then we went to, and it was funny is he didn't even realize I blocked him, but whatever. And then we went to that third weekend in New York City and it was a disaster. He drank way too much. He took some sort of pills. I don't know. He mentioned to my friend that it was Xanax. I don't know exactly what he had. I hadn't seen him have pills or medication before. So I think the combination of the pills and the drinking over the weekend got the better of him. And his jabs to me started being more often and more hurtful. At one point, I'll never forget this. The four of us were sitting at a bar, right? New York City. We had so much fun. I will talk about all the fun we had in New York City the next episode. But, and just how much I love the city and missed it. But, the four of us were just talking over drinks or whatever. And we all did a really good job of rotating drinks. Like one round was on one person, one round was in the other, whatever. Anyway, so he ended up drinking more than all of us. And, he would just say things like, look at her. She has no emotion. He would stop the conversation talking about me. And I was just like, what? There was a lot of little things. And since I have a podcast, he mentioned to my female friend, who's younger than me, if I followed the podcast. And then she would say, yes, right? Within the conversation of whatever. And then he would say, why do you listen to her? She doesn't know what she's talking about. There was a lot of little things like that. I could go on, but I really just want to talk about how it made me feel, right? I ended up feeling a little bit depressed about it. And then I realized it was a pattern. And I think it's important to talk about patterns, right? Okay. So from what I gather, what happened to me, I don't want to talk about him and speculate about his life. I want to protect his privacy. And it's not about him, right? It's about what happened and how I didn't see it and how I need to see it going forward and how I hope that you see what I didn't see, right? Okay, so what I think happens with an abusive spouse, partner, whatever you want to call them, over time, right? I think that they have a problem with your anger, not their anger, right? So I think what they are trying to do, this is my humble opinion, my experience, right? I just want to mention it so you can start a dialogue with your friends and family, right? Okay, so I think that they have a problem with your anger, right? I think that they are trying to take away your basic right to be angry about something, right? I think that they think it's crazy if you react. I think that they believe that you shouldn't react. I think that they think they're somewhat narcissistic and you should just take it, right? And when you react, I feel like they jump down your throat even harder than they would figuratively, of course, right? And I feel like they make you feel like you're the crazy one, and they make you feel guilty for overreacting, right? Like this guy, like throughout the weekend, he would say things like, because it got worse. Like, I felt a shift, right, in the dynamic between he and I when my friends were introduced. And by the weekend it was a 3-day weekend. And by the time the weekend was over, like I couldn't even look at him anymore, right? I was just so angry, but I didn't want to make a scene. So I just started closing myself off, right? And then he started saying things to my friend, like, I don't think we're going to see each other anymore after this weekend. And my poor friend was caught in the middle, right? Because I do not want to make a scene if I can help it, right? So, I don't know. I think it's important, though, if you're in a situation like this, right? I think it's important. My situation was a little different because we were all out of town together, right? He was staying with my friend. I think if you're in a situation like this and your friends and family mention it to you and you don't see it, I think it's worth stepping back, like I've talked about before, and just trying to reevaluate, trying to like adjust your lens, right? I didn't see it. He was manipulating me. He was making me feel like I was always in the wrong. He was making me feel like I was damaged because he would always say that I didn't have feelings, like I had walls up. And I kind of feel like we all have walls up to a certain degree, right? I mean, I've been married 3 times. I've been divorced 3 times, right? My 3 husbands were all great men. Like I don't blame them for what happened. I mean, I'm equally, at fault. I mean, I'm the fucking common denominator, right? 3 husbands, me. I mean, obviously I have some fault to take there, right? But I think when it comes to patterns and falling victim to abuse, right? So like I said, my father was physically abusive, right? Number 61 was emotionally abusive, right? He would make jabs when I would try to defend myself or try to talk about it with him at a quiet later time to not cause a scene. He would always make me feel like I was crazy. And I think that that's the cycle of abuse, right? And I just think it's worth mentioning and talking about and discussing, because I don't care how old you are. I don't care what you look like. I don't care how much you weigh. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care about any of those things. You are a human being, and your basic right is to be able to feel the way that you want to feel, right? I don't feel like it's okay for an abusive partner, spouse, whatever, to feel like they need to take your basic right away about being angry, right? We're all human. I'm certainly not perfect. But if somebody's going to say something that makes me angry, I have every right to defend myself, right? Verbally, physically, whatever, right? So I feel like when you're in this situation and you're manipulated, especially when the person is doing all these grand, sweet gestures for you, I think it's hard to see it on your own. I think this is a lesson that I'm probably going to be chewing on for a while because I didn't see it coming, right? Like I really thought he was great. I was like bragging to you guys. I was like, he's so fucking awesome. So many things about him I love. And then this weekend happened, and I have to accept some fault for that, right? I don't know. I hope that you guys learn something from this episode in the sense of, at the very least, it starts a dialogue with your friends and family, right? For me, what happened was I kind of felt like I was in a straitjacket, right? He would do something, I would defend myself, I would get angry, he would make me feel like I was crazy, right? I wouldn't say that I was depressed, but I did have some moments of like sadness about myself and about my future, because he would say things like, you're damaged. I'm the one who is here. I'm the one who's like willing to work on these things with you, right? And he was like, you're going to be 50. How many more good years do you think you have? Like, that's fucking offensive, right? But I was kind of sad, and I was kind of, caught in the cycle, I think, that I didn't even see that I kind of accepted that. And that's not okay, right? It's not okay for somebody to make you feel bad. I don't, like, as I said before, I don't care how fucking old somebody is. I don't care how old somebody looks like, what race they are, or whatever. It is your basic right to feel emotions, right? And if anger is one of them, fucking feel it. I don't think it's okay for somebody to make you feel like you can't sleep because you're like conflicted of things that they say about you, right? So I guess in the end, my message is here. Please start a dialogue with your friends and family, specifically if you have younger children, to just make them aware of situations that could point to flags or to signs of upcoming trouble, right? Because if you ever talk to somebody who's been like in an abusive relationship, like spouse, for example, right? I hate to say that, but it's the stereotypical story of the female who gets beaten up all the time, like hides her black eyes, whatever, because she feels bad because her husband's an asshole, right? I just think it's worth having this conversation. So when this all happened about the same time that we heard about poor Gabby, right? There was that footage where she looked emotionally upset and distraught. Now, none of us know what happened, right? We all know that Brian Laundrie is guilty to some point, right? They went on a trip together. He came back alone, right? So we don't really know what happened with the dynamic, right? We saw like the footage from the police department, and she was upset. I don't think that in that situation, it's right to blame either party, right? He had scratches on his face, so we don't really know what happened. We'll never really know what happened. And aside from legal issues, it's really none of our fucking business, right? But I do think that when this happened to me and her story broke, it really made me stop and pause and think about how even in 2021, I felt like we were blaming her. And I don't think that we should ever blame a victim. I'm not saying that she was, innocent in every way. I'm not saying I'm innocent in every way. But I do feel like if nothing else from this episode, please go back and talk to your friends and family about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, specifically with your children, right? I don't think it's okay to always have the burden fall on the female, right? I feel like we're always like, well, she was being abusive. She should have gotten out. I mean, there's hundreds of stories about that on the internet, right? Talking about poor Gabby, right? So we don't know the dynamic. We don't know what happened, but why blame her, right? Why not fucking blame him? Why not blame the guy? Why not be like, okay, society, we need to treat men to actually be men, right? I don't know. I saw a meme and this all just like kind of like just hit me in my heart. And it was basically talking about males and masculine toxicity, right? I don't feel like masculinity is toxic. I actually bought a t-shirt, which I love, basically saying that I'm just like masculine. But anyway, I don't feel like masculinity itself is toxic. I feel like weak men are toxic, right? Weak men are spiteful and hurtful and abusive, right? Strong fucking alpha, awesome fucking men are strong and they're protectors. So I think there's a little bit of a verbiage distinction that as a society we need to talk about and embrace, right? So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please reach out to me as you normally do. I love hearing from you guys on fucking like my social media, YouTube, any of the directories. Like I'm really happy and proud to know that I have helped a handful of you with the few episodes that I have. This is episode number 16, and I've heard from 3 to 5 of you that I will never name. One of them specifically, actually over the same weekend, was having some suicidal thoughts and reached out to me, and I think it's worth it, right? Like this is a platform for veterans, right? So I'm glad that this person felt comfortable enough to reach out to me, and that person, from what I can tell, is okay. And that's, I guess, the bottom line of this episode, right? If you see a cycle, fucking like try to break it for yourself or for your friends and family. And I look forward to hearing and speaking with you guys the very next episode. I promise I'm actually going to get out within 24 hours, and it's going to go back to being funny and comedic and sharing some of my ridiculousness, because after 61, I actually decided that I didn't want to date anymore, right? Because I was like, I need a break. And I had been wanting a break for a while because, I've been on fucking now 63 dates, right? So, the next one will be more uplifting, but I think this one was important. So thank you for bearing with me. If you have any, thoughts, questions, concerns, what have you, you know where to find me. And I'm here. And